Hey everyone, how you doing today? Episode number 2 with Anna Kelly. We are talking about what could cause a housing crash. You all are typing into Google. We've already talked about the government. We've got number 2 on deck. How you doing, Anna?
I'm doing great. You know what I love? I've worn off on you and I'm saying y'all now.
Y'all.
Woo! The Texan and the Californian.
Yeah, meeting in the middle somewhere. That's
Always,
awesome.
always great to be here and great topic.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, so I just want to be upfront with everyone. I blame this particular entity for causing the second half of the Great Recession crash. The Great Recession did not have to be as bad as it was if this entity, frankly, just did a better job or acted differently. And that is lenders. I believe lenders, if they wanted to, if they act in unison, I believe at any time, lenders could cause a housing crash. What do you think?
I think that it's possible for sure. I think one thing that's interesting, and we don't have to spend too much time there, though, most of the policies that caused the last crash, the lenders executed programs initiated by the government.
True.
And so when we have things like, usually when banks act in unity, it's because there's something new. They're being incentivized to do a certain type of loan to make changes in the economy that the government wants. So case in point, early, the Community Redevelopment Act back in the 1990s late 1990s is what really started to make home ownership more affordable for those who couldn't afford homes.
Right.
So they were doing loans for people the government knew normally couldn't afford loans. And they thought if they just take a quick 2-night class, they'll be able to budget and handle a mortgage payment. And so they gave out loans to people that couldn't afford them. Yeah. And again, the lenders got blamed, and the lenders had a big piece of the blame, but the program started and they were incentivized to keep it up because the government incentivized the banks to do it. How do I know? I worked for Bank of America at the time that rolled out under George Bush, right? So while I blamed the last session, I was like, the Democrats want to change the tax code. The Republicans, instituted the Community Redevelopment Act. So, the government in general wants to make changes. And right now we are looking at a government who says home ownership needs to be more affordable. We want to give loans to more people. We're kind of right back where we are, in the late 90s. And I think that can make banks react and take on risks that they otherwise wouldn't normally take on.
Yeah. I think when you think about banks, and I'll just say lenders, right? Lenders in general, they have the money. And for most people, most transactions, certainly over 90%, I would assume, leverage is involved, right? There's not many people out there that can stroke a check. So lenders really do control. They control the housing market, right? If they, for whatever reason, like we saw last March, at least in the flipping space, if they turn off, if they say, sorry, doors closed, market stops, right? So, not saying that lenders will, but if they wanted to, they could raise standards to say, hey, you have to put 50% down, a 30-year, no longer do 30 years, you have to do 15, interest rates 8%. Mm-hmm. I mean, they could, I'm not saying they will, but if lenders wanted to, and they acted in a way that we're not expecting, they could cause a housing crash all by themselves.
Right. Especially if rates go up. And again, it's very complicated. There's this dance between government agencies and monetary policy and how it trickles down to banks. There are the banks, there are the mortgage brokers, and then you've got these federally backed mortgage type agencies like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and FHA and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they just did, as an example, is in April 1st, Fannie and Freddie came in and said, hey, we're changing our loans to 1 to 4 unit investment properties and second homes. We're now going to make them, we're going to slash the amount of the loans we will back and then sell on the secondary market in half, from 15% to 7%. Yep. And we're raising credit standards. We're lowering LTV on certain properties. And so they're making it harder for small investors to buy 1 to 4 unit apartment buildings and to buy second homes. What is that going to do? It's going to decrease that demand for the supply that's out there in that 1 to 4 unit rental space and in the second home space. And eventually that's going to cause values, at least in that space, to come down a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing is now these banks have said, wait a second, if these agencies that usually buy these loans are only going to, buy half, and we do a loan and they decide not to buy it, we're stuck with that risk on our books. So what have they already said? Now they've said in order to take on that additional risk that they might be stuck with those loans, they're anticipating, a survey was done when this was announced last month, a 2% basis point interest rate, 200 basis points, 2% interest rate hike or spread between what they could lend on and what it's going to be backed at and what they'll accept and what they'll lend on. So if interest rates go up 2% on 1 to 4 family and second homes, just because these agencies will no longer buy them, you can guarantee that in that market, the demand's going to come down significantly enough that you could have a crash, on some scale, depending on how many investors that impacts. And so if that happens in the single family space as well for homeowners, all at the same time, interest rates going up significantly, loan criteria tightening, whether it's credit score, LTV, reserves that you have to hold, all those things happening now. And if that gets more aggressive, it definitely could cause a blip in the market and values to come down.
Yeah, there's no question. If they, well, let's just be frank. In my opinion, if they took the same aggressive tweak that they put on investments in owner occupant, that would slow down housing immediately. It would certainly be 10% again. I don't know if it hits the crash level, but it would take so many people out of the equation. And we'll talk more about that in episode 3. But again, lenders have the money. Lenders, if they act in unison, that's the key. People need act in unison, right? There's always times, like I go back to JP Morgan about a year ago, maybe 11 months ago. They got not aggressive. They got super conservative first. They're basically like, windows shut. We're only going to lend to people that don't need loans. That's basically who they wanted to lend to, right? It's like, yeah, you could write a check, but you don't want to. Okay, we'll lend to you. Right. But
yeah,
the others were still lending. So that it would have to be lenders acting in unison, but they could. And the other thing to realize is back to the Great Recession and why I opened with lenders caused the second half is lenders acted like they weren't going to work with you unless you were 90 days late. If you got 90 days late, you were 97% certain to go into foreclosure and oh, by the way, they wouldn't lend to experienced operators, right? If you owned more than 4, you couldn't play. So everything became a cash price, which, oh, by the way, was lower. And that is clearly, at least as of right now, they are acting the completely opposite way. But if they reverted back, and we got 3 million people in forbearance, maybe, but I think they're just going to act completely different this time.
Yeah, it's so hard to say, I think I keep saying this is such an anomaly in the economy and not like anything we've seen in the past, right? Because you're in a technical recession, you're in eviction moratorium, pandemic, where real estate investors in some ways have a lot more risk that the tenant can't pay. And there are certain lenders who are still lending very freely. I am starting to see that tighten up though a little bit. And I think even I was reading about the change on April 1 that I just told you about for small investors. They said the reason they're doing that is because they feel like there's the most risk there of inability to pay for all of their different programs. And why is there more risk of inability to pay? They didn't come out and say it, but it's because there's an eviction moratorium.
Of course.
So if your tenant can't pay you and you're a small landlord, they're concerned that you won't be able to make that mortgage payment on top of your current mortgage payment. So they focused on that area of risk and said, okay, that's what we're targeting. But I've also seen really just in the last month, it's really interesting. Just in the last month, I'm seeing both some of my coaching students, some of my friends, and myself with one of my lenders who they're starting to get a little nervous. They're like, well, the Fed's tightening up, the eviction moratorium is going longer. Even these smaller banks are going, are we willing to lend to newer investors who don't have a lot of reserves if this thing goes longer? And they are tightening up and they're lowering their LTV, what they'll loan on. So I just had somebody who was going in, they were going to give them 80%. They said, we'll approve you, but we changed our rules. Now we won't go any higher than 70%.
Oh, wow.
And so, we are starting to see some lenders get a little nervous and pull back. And what I've seen historically is it usually takes lenders 6 to 9 months to kind of start reacting, and then they get really tight a year later. And we're right up on that 1 year mark. And I'm starting to see these lenders start to act in a little more risk averse way, because now it looks like they might have to keep things on the books. So it could happen, Michael. I just don't know how bad it's going to get and whether the eviction moratorium goes away. If it does, I think there's going to be a lot more free money, but tighter criteria to get it.
Yeah, again, lenders make the rules. I think lenders, in order to cause a crash, again, that 20% mark we talked about in video one, they would have to do something for owner occupants. They would have to get tighter on the owner occupant side. Again, they've already come at investors, the small investors. I don't think that's enough to cause a crash, but boy, if they did anything close to that on the owner occupant side, it would be a problem.
Yeah. And I just don't see it happening. Not with the Democratic Party in place right now, and affordable housing being such a big initiative for them. I think we're going to see even greater programs giving even more people mortgages with very loose criteria.
Yes.
It'll be fine to get people into housing, which we want to see people have home ownership, right? Sure. But what's going to happen a few years down the road when they're not able to pay? And then we get right back into 2009 and foreclosures. So it's a little scary. Do I think it's going to happen tomorrow? No. But what's it going to look like 5 years from now if that free money starts flowing and they give loans to people who really don't have any business owning a home yet?
Yeah. Again, this conversation, lenders do control the money. They could cause a crash all by themselves. Again, neither of these three conversations are we think these are happening. We're just having, hey guys, if you're falling for the crash videos, there's only three things that could cause it, right? Government could do it. They could get mean. Banks could do it all by themselves. And we do have a surprise for number three. But yeah, we shall see. And again, I am like you. I'm nervous for the next recession. That makes me nervous. Right? Yeah. So in the end, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.